The restaurant went silent the moment the Mafia boss lifted his fork. Silvio Romano, cold, untouchable, feared by an entire city, was about to take his first bite when a scream cut through the room. "Don't eat that!" All heads snapped toward the doorway. A little girl stood there, thin, shivering, clothes soaked from the rain. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks red from the cold, but her eyes were full of sheer terror. She stumbled forward, nearly tripping over her own feet. "Please," she gasped, pointing at his plate. "Don't eat it. Please don't." Silvio's men reached for their guns instantly. Customers ducked. No one spoke. But the Mafia boss raised a hand, stopping everyone. "Why?" he asked, voice low, dangerous. "How do you know what's in my food?" The girl's lips trembled. "Because," she whispered, "because I saw the man who poisoned it." A ripple of shock swept through the room. Silvio's jaw tightened. His fork froze inches from the plate. His men exchanged looks. No one dared to breathe. And then the little girl said something that made even the Mafia boss's blood run cold. "He tried to poison me yesterday, too." In that moment, the most feared man in the city realized this wasn't just an attempted hit. It was a message, a warning, and the key to everything was standing right in front of him, barefoot and shaking. Stay with me until the end, because what the Mafia boss discovered next would flip the entire underworld upside down. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. Romano's Ristorante was the kind of place where deals were made in whispers and blood debts were settled over fine wine. The establishment sat on the corner of 5th and Marconi, its windows tinted black, its entrance guarded by men who asked no questions and gave no mercy. For 20 years, this had been Silvio Romano's kingdom, his private dining room where he conducted business that never made it to the newspapers. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be celebratory. Silvio had just closed the biggest arms deal of his career. $3 million worth of weapons moving through the port. Enough firepower to arm a small revolution. His organization was expanding into new territories, pushing out rival families who had grown weak and complacent. At 63, when most men his age were thinking about retirement, Silvio Romano was building an empire. The dining room reflected his success. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over mahogany tables. The walls were lined with paintings worth more than most people's homes. Waiters in pristine white shirts moved like ghosts between the tables, serving dishes prepared by a chef who had once cooked for European royalty. But success in Silvio's world came with a price. Every handshake was a potential betrayal. Every meal could be your last. Trust was a luxury he couldn't afford, which was why his food was always tasted by someone else first, which was why his bodyguards swept every room before he entered, which was why he had survived this long in a business where most men died young. Tonight, however, his usual precautions had been relaxed. The restaurant was closed to the public. His most trusted lieutenants surrounded him. The chef had been working for his family for 15 years. Everything seemed secure. Silvio sat at his usual table in the center of the room, positioned so he could see every entrance and exit. To his right sat Marco Torino, his underboss and oldest friend. To his left was Vincent Caruso, his enforcer, a man whose hands had ended more lives than cancer. Across from him sat his accountant, a nervous little man named Eddie who handled the money laundering operations. The conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine. They discussed expansion plans, territorial disputes, and the unfortunate necessity of eliminating certain competitors. Business, in other words. The kind of business that had made Silvio Romano the most powerful man in the city. The waiter approached with practiced silence, setting down Silvio's favorite dish, osso buco with saffron risotto. The meat fell off the bone, the sauce rich and aromatic. It was comfort food, the kind his mother used to make before the cancer took her. Even killers had their weaknesses. Silvio picked up his fork, the silver gleaming under the chandelier light. This was his ritual, his moment of peace before returning to the violence that defined his world. He brought the fork toward the tender meat, savoring the anticipation. And that's when everything changed. The little girl's voice shattered the carefully constructed atmosphere like a gunshot through glass. Security protocols that had been perfected over decades crumbled in an instant. Men who had faced down rival gangs and federal agents were suddenly scrambling, unsure how to respond to a child. But Silvio remained perfectly still. His dark eyes studied the girl with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, maybe 9 at most. Her clothes were several sizes too large, hanging off her thin frame like a scarecrow's costume. Her sneakers had holes in them, and her socks were visible through the worn fabric. What struck him most wasn't her poverty. He'd seen plenty of poor children in his neighborhood growing up. It was the intelligence in her eyes. Despite her obvious fear, despite the way her whole body trembled, there was something sharp and calculating about her gaze. She wasn't just scared. She was desperate, but she was thinking. "You saw who poisoned my food," Silvio said, his voice barely above a whisper. The entire room leaned forward to hear him. "Tell me his name." The girl's eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces of dangerous men who were staring at her like she was either a miracle or a threat. "I don't know his name," she said, her voice small but steady. "But I know what he looks like, and I know why he did it." Marco Torino shifted in his seat, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun concealed beneath his jacket. "Boss, this could be a setup. Maybe someone sent her here to—" "Shut up," Silvio said without taking his eyes off the girl. "Let her talk." The girl took a shaky step closer. Water dripped from her soaked clothes onto the expensive carpet. "He's tall," she said. "Maybe 6 feet. Brown hair, but it's getting gray on the sides. He has a scar on his left hand, right here." She pointed to the space between her thumb and index finger. Silvio's blood went cold. He knew that scar. He'd given it to someone 20 years ago with a broken bottle during a dispute over territory. Someone who was supposed to be dead. "What else?" he demanded, his voice sharper now. "He wears expensive suits, but they don't fit right, like he bought them too big on purpose. And he has this thing he does with his hands. He keeps rubbing his fingers together when he's nervous." Every detail was accurate. Every single one. The man she was describing was Anthony DeLuca, his former partner, his former friend, and according to official records, a corpse who had been buried in St. Mary's Cemetery 15 years ago. But if Tony was alive, if he was here in the city, then everything Silvio thought he knew about his world was wrong. Every alliance, every peace treaty, every carefully negotiated truce was built on a lie. And if Tony was making moves against him now, after all these years, it meant someone had been planning this for a very long time. The girl continued, unaware that she had just rewritten the rules of a game she didn't even know she was playing. "He came to where I was sleeping yesterday, under the bridge by the old factory. He had food with him, said he wanted to help me, but I saw him put something in it when he thought I wasn't looking. The same little bottle he used tonight." Silvio's mind raced. Why would Tony try to poison a homeless child? What possible purpose could that serve? Unless it wasn't about the girl at all. Unless she had simply been a test run, a way to make sure the poison worked before using it on the real target. The implications hit Silvio like a freight train. If Tony DeLuca was alive, then the carefully orchestrated hit that supposedly ended his life had been nothing more than theater. Someone had helped him fake his death. Someone with access to morgue records, cemetery plots, and enough influence to make a body disappear without questions. That kind of operation required resources and connections that went far beyond street-level criminals. Vincent Caruso leaned forward, his scarred knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. "Boss, if it's really Tony, then we got a serious problem. Half the territories we control used to be his. If he's been planning a comeback—" "I said shut up!" Silvio snapped, but his mind was already 3 steps ahead. Tony knew his routines, his favorite restaurants, his security protocols. More importantly, Tony knew his weaknesses. They had grown up together in the same neighborhood, learned the business from the same mentors, shared secrets that could destroy both their empires. The girl shifted nervously, water still dripping from her clothes onto the Persian rug. "There's something else," she said, her voice barely audible. "When he was putting the stuff in my food, he was talking to someone on the phone. He said something about making sure the old man would be at Romano's tonight. He said the timing had to be perfect." Silvio's blood turned to ice. The old man. That's what Tony used to call him during their partnership, even though they were only 5 years apart in age. It had been a joke back then, a sign of affection between brothers in arms. Now it felt like a knife twisting in his chest. But there was something else that bothered him even more. How had Tony known he would be here tonight? This dinner had been arranged only yesterday, a last-minute celebration of the arms deal. The guest list was small, the location chosen for its security and privacy. Someone on the inside had fed Tony information. Silvio's eyes swept across the faces of his most trusted associates. Marco, who had been by his side for 25 years. Vincent, who had taken bullets for him on 3 separate occasions. Eddie, who handled finances too sensitive for anyone else to touch. One of them was a traitor, or maybe all of them. The girl coughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the silent restaurant. She was getting sicker by the minute, her skin pale and clammy from the cold rain. But she remained standing, her eyes fixed on Silvio with an intensity that reminded him of himself at that age. Hungry, desperate, but unafraid to fight for survival. "What's your name?" he asked. "Luna," she replied. "Luna Martinez." "How long have you been living on the streets, Luna?" Her chin lifted with a pride that transcended her circumstances. 2 months. Since my mama died." Silvio felt something twist in his chest, an emotion he had thought died along with his humanity years ago. This child had lost everything, had been abandoned by a system that was supposed to protect her, yet she had risked her life to save his. A complete stranger, a man who represented everything wrong with the world she was trying to survive in. "Why?" he asked. "Why warn me? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." Luna's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. "Because nobody deserves to die like that. Scared and alone, not knowing what's happening. My mama died in the hospital, and they wouldn't even let me see her at the end, because I didn't have the right papers. I don't want anyone else to feel that scared." The room remained frozen in stunned silence. Here was a child who had every reason to hate the world, to let the powerful destroy each other while she focused on her own survival. Instead, she had chosen compassion over revenge, mercy over justice. It was a lesson that cut deeper than any blade Silvio had ever faced. Marco cleared his throat nervously. "Boss, we need to move. If Tony's making his play tonight, then—" "He already made it," Silvio interrupted. He pushed the untouched plate away from him, the poisoned food suddenly looking as dangerous as a loaded gun. "The question is how deep this goes. How many people knew about tonight's dinner? How many had access to the kitchen? How many knew exactly when I'd be taking my first bite?" The questions hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Trust, the foundation upon which every criminal organization was built, had been shattered in a matter of minutes. And the person who had saved his life wasn't one of his loyal soldiers or his carefully vetted security team. It was a homeless child who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Eddie the accountant spoke up for the first time, his voice shaking. "Mr. Romano, if there's a leak in the organization, we need to find it fast. The arms shipment arrives tomorrow night. If Tony knows about that too, then we're all dead men," Vincent finished grimly. Silvio stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled, despite the chaos raging in his mind. He walked around the table until he was standing directly in front of Luna, this tiny girl who had just turned his world upside down. Up close, he could see the intelligence burning behind her dark eyes, the way she studied his face like she was reading a book, written in a language only she understood. "Luna," he said softly, "I need you to tell me everything you remember about this man. Every detail, no matter how small. Can you do that?" She nodded, then winced as another cough racked her small frame. He had a briefcase with him, black leather with gold corners, and he kept checking his watch, one of those fancy ones that tells you what time it is in different countries. Silvio's jaw clenched. The watch was a Patek Philippe, custom-made, one of only 12 ever produced. Tony had bought it during their most successful year together, back when they controlled half the waterfront and money flowed like wine. Silvio knew because he had helped pick it out. What else? He had a car parked across the street from where I sleep. Big black car with windows you can't see through. But I saw the license plate. It started with the letters TD, Tony DeLuca. Even in hiding, even after 15 years of supposed death, the man couldn't resist flaunting his identity. It was classic Tony. Arrogant, theatrical, convinced of his own invincibility. Some things never changed, but other things had changed. The Tony that Silvio remembered had been impulsive, driven by emotion rather than strategy. This new version was patient, methodical, willing to wait 15 years for the perfect moment to strike. That kind of transformation didn't happen in isolation. Someone had been teaching him, guiding him, helping him become a more dangerous enemy than he had ever been as a friend. The pieces of a massive conspiracy were beginning to fall into place, and Silvio realized that tonight's assassination attempt was just the opening move in a much larger game. A game where the stakes weren't just territory or money, but the very survival of everything he had built. And the only person who could help him navigate this deadly maze was a 9-year-old girl who slept under bridges and survived on scraps of food that strangers sometimes shared. The irony would have been amusing if it wasn't so terrifying. Silvio knelt down until he was at eye level with Luna, his expensive suit creasing as he lowered himself. The gesture sent shockwaves through his men. None of them had ever seen their boss show such vulnerability, such humanity. But something about this child had cracked through the armor he'd built over decades of violence and betrayal. "Luna," he said, his voice gentler than it had been in years. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you. But I need your help to make sure no one else gets hurt either." The girl nodded, though her whole body continued to tremble. Whether from cold, fear, or both, Silvio couldn't tell. What he could see was the fierce determination in her young face, the same look he'd worn as a boy when he'd decided to fight back against the bullies who controlled his neighborhood. "The man who tried to poison you," Silvio continued. "Did he say anything else? Anything about other people? Other places?" Luna closed her eyes, concentrating. "He was on the phone a lot, always talking about timing and schedules. He mentioned something about a warehouse by the docks, said everything had to happen before the ships arrived." Vincent Caruso exchanged a meaningful look with Marco. The warehouse district was where the arms shipment was scheduled to arrive tomorrow night. If Tony knew about that operation, then the implications went far beyond a simple assassination attempt. This was about destroying Silvio's entire enterprise. "Boss," Marco whispered urgently, "if he knows about the shipment—" "I heard her," Silvio cut him off sharply. He stood up, his mind already calculating the necessary moves. "Eddie, get on the phone with our contacts at the port. I want security tripled on every warehouse we control. Vincent, round up the usual suspects. Anyone who's had contact with Tony in the past 5 years. Dead or alive, apparently." "What about the girl?" Vincent asked, glancing down at Luna with obvious uncertainty. Silvio looked at the child who had just saved his life, and possibly his entire operation. She was still shivering, still soaked from the rain, still looking like she might collapse at any moment. But her eyes held steady on his face, waiting to see what kind of man he truly was. The old Silvio would have seen her as a loose end to be eliminated, a witness who knew too much, who could potentially cause problems down the line. In his world, sentiment was a luxury that got you killed. Mercy was a weakness that enemies exploited. But something had shifted in that moment when Luna had screamed her warning. Maybe it was the memory of his own childhood, when he'd been just another hungry kid on these same streets. Maybe it was the realization that true loyalty couldn't be bought or intimidated. It had to be earned through actions, not fear. "The girl comes with us," Silvio said finally. "She's under my protection now." His men looked stunned. In 25 years of working for Silvio Romano, none of them had ever heard him take personal responsibility for a civilian. But there was something in his tone that discouraged any argument. "Sir," Eddie ventured nervously, "bringing an outsider into our operations could be..." "Could be what?" Silvio's voice carried a dangerous edge. "More risky than having a traitor in our inner circle? More dangerous than walking into an obvious trap because we were too arrogant to see it coming?" The accountant fell silent, his face pale. Everyone in the room understood the implication. If Luna hadn't intervened, Silvio would be dead right now, and with him would have died any chance of uncovering the conspiracy that threatened to destroy them all. Silvio turned back to Luna, who was watching this exchange with the sharp attention of someone who had learned to read adult moods for survival. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded hesitantly. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Marco, have the kitchen prepare something safe. And get her some dry clothes. There must be something that will fit her." Silvio paused, studying the girl's face. "Luna, I'm going to ask you to do something that might be scary, but I promise you'll be safe. Do you trust me?" The question hung in the air. Here was a child who had every reason to distrust powerful adults, being asked to put her faith in one of the most dangerous men in the city. Luna looked around the room, taking in the faces of hardened criminals, the expensive surroundings, the barely concealed weapons. "You didn't eat the food when I told you not to," she said simply. "That means you listen. Most grown-ups don't listen to kids." It was a profound observation, delivered with the matter-of-fact honesty that only children possessed. Silvio found himself smiling for the first time in months, not the cold, calculating smile he used in business meetings, but something genuine and warm. "You're right," he said. "Most of us forget how to listen. But you just reminded me why it's important." Luna nodded solemnly. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to help me find the man who tried to hurt both of us. You're the only person who's seen him recently, who knows what he looks like now, but it means going to places that might be dangerous, seeing things that might be scary. I'll make sure you're protected, but I can't promise it will be easy." The girl considered this for a long moment. Around the room, battle-hardened criminals waited for the decision of a 9-year-old who had more courage in her small frame than most of them had ever possessed. "Will you catch him?" she asked. "Yes." "Will you make sure he can't hurt other kids?" "Yes." "Then I'll help you." The simplicity of her moral code put the complex machinations of Silvio's world to shame. For Luna, the choice was clear. Stop bad people from hurting innocent people. Everything else was just details. Vincent cleared his throat. "Boss, we should move soon. If Tony's planning something for tomorrow night, we need to get ahead of it." Silvio nodded, but his attention was drawn to something else Luna had mentioned. "You said the man was always checking his watch, timing everything perfectly. That suggests he's coordinating with someone else. Multiple someones, probably. He kept saying things like Phase 2 and the schedule," Luna added helpfully, "like it was all planned out ahead of time. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just Tony DeLuca returning from the dead to settle old scores. This was a carefully orchestrated campaign to dismantle everything Silvio had built. The assassination attempt was just the opening move. Tomorrow's sabotage of the arms shipment would cripple his finances and his reputation. But what came after that? Marco leaned forward urgently. "Boss, if this is as big as it sounds, we need to reach out to our allies. The Torino family, the Russians, maybe even..." "No." Silvio's voice was firm. "We don't know how deep this conspiracy goes. For all we know, our allies are part of it. We handle this internally until we know who we can trust." "But sir, if we're outnumbered..." "We're not outnumbered," Silvio interrupted, glancing down at Luna. We have something they don't expect. We have the truth. The girl looked up at him with eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. My mama used to say that the truth always comes out eventually, but sometimes it needs help finding its way. Another profound observation from an unlikely source. Silvio realized that in trying to protect Luna, he might actually be protecting himself. Her innocent perspective was cutting through years of paranoia and mistrust, helping him see patterns he'd been too close to notice. "Eddie," Silvio commanded, "I want a complete financial audit of everyone who knew about tonight's dinner. Look for unusual payments, unexplained expenses, anything that doesn't fit the normal pattern. Vincent, start surveillance on the warehouse district, but keep it subtle. I don't want to spook anyone into changing their plans. Marco, reach out to your contacts in the police department. See if there have been any unusual inquiries about our operations lately. Someone's been feeding Tony information, and I want to know who." His men scattered to carry out their orders, leaving Silvio alone with Luna in the elegant dining room that had nearly become his tomb. The poisoned plate sat untouched on the table, a reminder of how close he'd come to death. "Mr. Silvio," Luna said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you being so nice to me? Most people who have fancy restaurants and expensive suits, they don't like kids like me. They pretend we're invisible." The question hit him harder than any physical blow he'd ever received. Here was a child who had saved his life, and she couldn't understand why he was treating her with basic human decency. What kind of world had they created where kindness was so rare that it seemed suspicious? "Because," Silvio said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "sometimes the most important people are the ones everyone else overlooks. Sometimes the person who can save your life is the last person you'd expect." Luna nodded thoughtfully. "Is that why you became a—" She paused, clearly struggling with how to describe his profession. "A criminal?" Silvio supplied with a wry smile. "Because everyone overlooked me when I was young, and I decided to make them pay attention? Something like that." Silvio sat back down, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Luna's ragged clothes. But in that moment, the distance between their worlds seemed smaller than it had ever been. "You know what the funny thing is?" he said. "I spent my whole life fighting to never be powerless again. I built an empire, surrounded myself with loyal soldiers, accumulated enough wealth and influence to protect myself from anyone. But tonight, all of that nearly got me killed. And the person who actually saved me was someone with no power at all, just courage." Luna smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant. "My mama used to say that courage isn't about not being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are scared. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. She would have liked you, I think. She always said that people aren't really good or bad. They're just people. And people can change." The innocence of the statement was almost heartbreaking. Here was a child who had lost everything, who had been abandoned by every system designed to protect her, still believing in the fundamental goodness of humanity. It was a faith that Silvio had lost decades ago, crushed under the weight of betrayal and violence. But looking into Luna's eyes, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, not for power or wealth or revenge, but for redemption, for the possibility that even someone like him could choose a different path. The moment was interrupted by Marco's return. His face was grim, and he carried a phone in his hand. "Boss," he said urgently, "we got a problem. I just heard from our contact at the port. 3 of our warehouse guards didn't show up for their shifts tonight, and there's been unusual activity. Round Pier 17, vehicles moving in and out, people who don't belong there." Silvio stood immediately, his mind shifting back into tactical mode. Tony's moving faster than expected. He's not waiting for tomorrow night. "There's more," Marco continued. "The guards who didn't show up, their families can't find them either. It looks like they've been taken." The implications were chilling. Tony wasn't just planning to sabotage the arms shipment. He was eliminating anyone who might interfere. The missing guards were either dead or being held to ensure their silence. Either way, it meant the conspiracy was moving into its next phase. Luna tugged on Silvio's jacket. "The man I saw," she said urgently. "When he was on the phone, he kept talking about cleaning house before the big finale. Maybe that's what he meant, getting rid of people who might cause problems." Silvio knelt down beside her again. "Luna, I need you to think very carefully. Did you hear him mention any specific names? Any places besides the warehouse?" She closed her eyes, concentrating fiercely. "He said something about Romano's people at the docks, and he mentioned a name. Johnny something. Johnny the Fish, maybe." Silvio's blood went cold. Johnny Marconi, known as Johnny the Fish, was one of his most trusted dock supervisors. If Tony had gotten to Johnny, then the entire port operation was compromised. "Marco, get every available man down to the warehouses, but go in quiet. I don't want to start a war in the middle of the night. Vincent, find out what happened to Johnny Marconi. And Eddie, start liquidating our emergency accounts. If this goes bad, we'll need clean money to disappear." His men moved with military precision, years of training taking over in the crisis. But Silvio remained focused on Luna, this unlikely ally who had already proven more valuable than most of his paid informants. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Silvio said grimly, "we go hunting." What started as a simple dinner became a night that changed everything. Luna Martinez, a homeless 9-year-old with nothing to lose, saved the life of one of the city's most dangerous men. But more than that, she revealed a conspiracy that ran deeper than anyone imagined. Anthony DeLuca, supposedly dead for 15 years, was orchestrating the downfall of his former partner's empire. And the key to unraveling it all came from the most unexpected source: a child who chose courage over silence, compassion over survival. Sometimes the people we overlook are the ones who hold the power to save us. Sometimes wisdom comes from the most innocent voices, and sometimes even the hardest hearts can be cracked open by a single act of bravery. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button for more incredible tales of unexpected heroes and shocking revelations.